vengeance!
Hit the pace car! What for? Because you hit every other damn thing out there. I want you to be perfect.
When I'm driving, I got a guy on the radio who talks to me. It's him. He talks to me.
Well, I wanna be a race car driver. Pretty girls eating from my hand, yeah. Wanna live a life of fun and danger. No sweater working for the man, alright. Well, hey. Well, I wanna be a firefighter. Cool-headed when the heat is on, yeah. Save my baby from the burning building. Take her home with the sprinklers on, alright. Well, alright.
No, he didn't slam you, he didn't bump you, he didn't nudge you. He rubbed you. And rubbing, son, is racing.
Hey race fans, welcome to the Whoobazoo Radio Network. Welcome to Drafting the Circuits. My name is Frank Santoroski. I'll be your host for the next hour as we discuss everything racing. Before we do that, let me introduce you to the panel I have assembled for you tonight. With me, as always, Mr. Gray Warren from Richard Childress Racing. Gray, how are you?
Doing great.
All right. Richard Youden, between jobs, but something on the horizon. Richard, how are you?
I'm very good, thank you.
All right. From IndyCar.com and Motorsports Tribune, Mr. Joey Barnes is in the house. Joey, how are you?
Doing great. Thanks for having me.
All right, and last but certainly not least, our NASCAR correspondent over there at Motorsports Tribune, Seth Eggert, coming back from a trip to Bristol in the rain and the snow. Seth, good to have you on. How are you tonight?
Glad to be back.
All right, glad to have you here. So we had all three major race series in action this weekend. We had Formula One in Shanghai. Daniel Ricciardo taking the win there. IndyCar was at Long Beach, the longest-running street race in North America. Alexander Rossi, impressive run, took the win there. And then NASCAR had a rain-delayed race held in two parts, part one Sunday, part two Monday. At the end of the day, it was Kyle Busch taking yet another Bristol win and another win to pad his win total. Good old Kyle Busch. But let's start off with IndyCar. Now, Joey, you've been traveling a lot. You were at Phoenix. You were at Long Beach. You're getting ready to head to Alabama. Rossi was just darn impressive. And, my crazy fact of the day is that Rossi was the last American to start a Formula One race. Rossi now has wins at Indianapolis, Watkins Glen, and now Long Beach. And all three of these tracks were the host of the United States Grand Prix for Formula One. And here's a guy that Formula One sort of turned their back on, winning all these tracks. What does this fact mean? Probably nothing in the long run, but it's interesting nonetheless. But Rossi has really come on strong as a championship contender. But there was another guy who had a really strong run that was ruined by an unfortunate series of events. That would be Sebastian Bourdais, who won the season opener. And Joey, you wrote a great story about that. That's on IndyCar.com if you'd like to catch it. But Joey, let's just kind of dig into this Long Beach race. You were there. You've written about it, covered it. So I'm just going to give you the floor.
Yeah. So I think, looking at Alexander Rossi, from my point of view, and what I've been telling everybody since the race ended on Sunday, was just the fact that this is the gradual maturation of a driver coming into the series that you hope to see whenever we talk about all these young guns getting up here and we think, okay, they've got the potential to one day be great. Well, Rossi, we knew he was fast in F1, and he, clutch coasted his way to an Indy 500, but to do things outright on pace from a championship perspective, we're seeing that growth year over year. And yeah, he's also, you talk about those tracks he's won on, there are also three different types of track. It's a street course, it's a natural road course, and it's a super speedway. So the only thing missing from that resume now is a short oval. Will Power has him pegged as the championship, guy to beat. So I think that certainly shows how good Alexander Rossi has been, and when you think about the fact that he's also the only guy to have podiums in each of the first three races, he's could have won each of those races if not for a little miscues, like running into Wickens at St. Pete, and then the pit road issue at Phoenix, passing 53 cars and still managing to finish at P3. it's remarkable to see what he's been able to do. And I think now we're really starting to see what I've kind of been expecting is when's this changing of the guard going to start happening at Andretti Autosport. And I feel like, now we're starting to see, like, Ryan Hunter-Reay's always been viewed as the leader. He's Captain America for Andretti Autosport. But we're starting to see maybe a little bit of a change of the tide to where Andretti Autosport's going to go as far as Alexander Rossi is going to take them. And, it just incredible drive, dominant drive for the weekend, pretty reminiscent of what he did at Watkins Glen. And, keep in mind that it's not just his drive that's grown in his racing craft, but it's also they're really clicking, him and Jeremy Millis, his engineer. So as we look at Barber, as we look at Indy, it's going to be really tough to beat because I don't really see a huge weakness whenever I look at all the tracks that they go to. There's not really a huge weakness for him.
No, and the interesting thing is, when we talk about the team as a whole, Andretti Autosport, they really haven't had a championship contender since, Hunter-Reay, when he took the title in 12. Mind you, they were probably hurt more than other teams with the AeroKit era. They just never could figure it out. While Graham Rahal was taking some wins here and there, the Honda package was never the match of the Chevrolet, as the Penske cars and even the Ganassi cars, when they were still with Chevrolet, kind of trounced them. But this could be, the fifth title for Andretti Autosports. I know it's early in the season, but this is the best start for that team since, the pre-AeroKit era.
Yeah, if you think about it, a year ago, we were talking about Andretti Autosport running really fast at Long Beach, but all four cars getting a DNF for mechanical or electrical gremlins. They turn around and put three in the top 10, and with Marco and Zach Veach finishing fourth, and then Rossi with the win. Ryan Hunter-Reay had incredible pace, so it wasn't for a lack of trying. It was just he kept getting involved in somebody else's mess half the time. At the start of the race, he broke his front wing after the accordion effect of Rahal hitting Pagano. And then later in the race, Sato got a hold of his right rear and punctured his tire. So there was all sorts of things that were happening to him. But, yeah, on the street courses also 2 years ago, Andretti Autosport was abysmal. So, and you think about where they've come from, the last guy they've had in the top 5 in the championship was Marco Andretti. And the year after Hunter-Reay won in 12, Marco finished 5th in 2013. It's been that long since we've been able to say Andretti Autosport's been a relevant championship contender. And I think that this is certainly a year that they look ready to pounce. I think it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out because Schmidt-Peterson Motorsports have hit on some things. Even though they don't have a lot of time together, they're incredibly fast. And then you look at, Andretti Autosport, obviously, with what they've been able to do with sustaining a relatively the same engineering staff, mostly the same driver lineup. And then you add to the fact that Penske's Penske and Scott Dixon is Scott Dixon. Dixon's teammate Ed Jones finishes P3 on Sunday. So it's incredible to see what this season has been able to bring. And every single race, you can't say hasn't been entertaining. I know some might disagree on the Phoenix perspective, but we still ended up with an ending where we really didn't know who was going to come out of that one. So it's been unpredictable. It's been wild, and I think it's just going to continue to be that way going to Barber.
Absolutely.
I think Bourdais may have something to say as far as championship contender, being a championship contender, because he's been right there in all three of the races we've seen so far. Cut out the mistakes that he's had, and he's right there.
Yeah, his pace has been ridiculous. I've talked to him both at Phoenix and then after Long Beach, and I have difficulty trying to figure out about Sunday if it was a pass or whatnot. I think when you look at it, you could argue both sides, right? Like to set up the scenario for the listeners, Bourdais coming out of the hairpin, turn 11 on the main straight, and he's in third, making a run on Dixon, who's making a run on a lap car. And at a street course, he takes it 3 wide and proceeds to use push to pass once he gets past the start-finish line. And as he's approaching Dixon alongside, you look ahead of him, and turn 1's on the far left, and Matthias Leist is coming up on him very quickly. So the fact that he could sit there before they got to Leist, swing in, not hit anything, and make a move. I mean, he said that it wasn't necessarily a pass as much as it was just a save. He when you look at it, it kind of looks like maybe Dixon moved a little bit, but, you wonder, okay, well, did he have to move? Did Bourdais have to move that much in response to Dixon? But, I mean, these are all split-second decisions, and these are the most talented drivers in the world to race this close and to not hit anything. So I think that to pull off a pass like that was incredible. It was funny to me to see him after he got penalized for saying, okay, you got to give the position back. You made a pass where you blurred the line on pit exit to make the pass. He gives the pass back, and then literally 30 seconds later, he just takes it right back on Dixon because he said he was just straight pissed off. So Bourdais' pace is ridiculous. I think that, everything that we were hoping to see last year, where up until Indy, he was a threat everywhere, and then Indy, obviously, with the bad hit and getting hurt. We may be in for that kind of Bourdais, hopefully without any incidents moving forward, because he's just been unreal for a guy that's... We always talk about these guys that are they're approaching 40 years old, and when are they going to get out of the seat? Which is funny to me, because we used to see AJ Foyt and Mario Andretti race until they were in their 50s, certainly Bourdais' pace isn't...
Al Unser and Gordon Johncock, all these guys were winning over 40. So, but so now the penalty, was it warranted? Was it not? That's been up for debate all week. But then the unfortunate timing of the yellow with the pit stop. Again, we've seen this kind of really wreck guys' races in IndyCar, where it's almost become a running joke, with where we go ahead and close the pits and gap up the field. But if you've just pitted prior to the yellow, you pitted right as the yellow came out, you're going to the back of the field. And I don't know if there's anything that could be done differently with that. But again, it really ruined Bourdais' day, and it put him, in his own words, he said, put him in the back of the field racing with idiots. I don't know if the idiot term was warranted, but he ended up having contact with.
He got dumped.
Exactly.
Got dumped. Yeah.
So Joey, talk us through that one, because that's the other half of the story.
Yeah. So Bourdais is getting ready to pit along with Dixon, and as the pit road at Long Beach is really finicky because there's literally a gap in the wall. You come off, you peel off to the right, and you make a judgment call to just swing right and get on pit road. And in the middle of that happening, Bourdais' teammate, Clayman DeMello, I think it was turn 9, is where he ended up hitting. And the yellow light came on right as he approached, and Dixon did get serviced, and Bourdais drove on through, because the rule of thumb is when pit road's closed and you get serviced, you have to pull a drive-through. You have to get a drive-through penalty usually. So Bourdais waited, went through, came back, pitted, restarted 11th. Dixon came out, was P3, but eventually had to serve that drive-through penalty right after the restart, I believe it was. So that rule's really finicky. I always like the idea of, look, it's a judgment call anytime, right? Like even with NASCAR, there's situations with close pits and things like that. I think that it's a guessing game. You want to get to pit road when you see an incident. It's always been get to pit road before the yellow flies. And I think that's still the case. If you're in your pit stall and the yellow flies, it's not like you're going to sustain the penalty in IndyCar. It's just that you lucked into an opportunity. And, sometimes it's better be lucky than good. In Rossi's case, he was both on Sunday. And that's just the nature of racing. We saw it in Australia with the virtual safety car and situation and the F1 race. It's just being able to catch everything in the right situation. But for Bourdais to come out with that kind of pace that he had, because he started 9th in the race, qualifying pace is not their strong suit, but man, race pace, they absolutely nailed it every single weekend. And, even qualifying for Phoenix since he was on pole. But, yeah, street courses, restarting 11th, ends up getting kind of rear-ended by Jordan King, ends up backwards with staring at Wickens and Hunter Ray. It just, and that more or less, I think Hunter Ray said he went from the back to the front 5 times. So it was just, the race was really crazy, really chaotic. unfortunately, Bourdais, Hunter-Reay, guys like that who had incredible cars, incredible pace, were a victim of some of the chaos that happened of the day.
And and that's the byproduct of a tight street race, and we've seen that on Long Beach. At Long Beach, as long as I can remember Long Beach, but the good news was that I had read a little story today that the attendance at Long Beach was the highest it's been since the kart era. So,
oh God, it was crowded, man.
Yeah,
they said crowded.
The fans are coming back, enjoying the new car, enjoying the new stars of the series. The TV ratings are still, I think it was a .27.
I'll tell you what was brilliant about Long Beach. I sit there Friday, and I was like, man, there's so many people. It was tough to get through a crowd of people, and just as soon as you want to cuss at something because you're trying to get through the crowd, you're remembering, wait a minute, this is awesome. And it's funny, what they did at Long Beach was something I wish more racetracks would probably do. Some of them will say they can never take the financial hit, but it was, from what I was told, it was a free Friday. So any fans could come in, walk in, walk around, go to the expo, watch practices for Pirelli World Challenge, IMSA, IndyCar, Stadium Super Trucks, watch Formula Drift cars at I think it was the east end of the track. And it's an opportunity for people that don't know about the sport. It's not going to cost them anything. I mean, and you're still making money on concessions and different things like that and merchandise. So opening up on a Friday is certainly not a bad idea, and it showed because the entire weekend just was flooded with people, and it's good to see. And I think it was a smart business decision for the long term, that you're not playing the short game. That in that situation, you're playing the long game, and I'd like to see more racetracks maybe open up and have a thought process like that.
And you have to wonder how many of those folks that were there Sunday stopped by on the free Friday and said, man, this is pretty cool. Let me buy a ticket for Sunday,
Exactly.
Yeah. So, good stuff all around for Long Beach. We're on to Barber next. And, Joey, you'll be there. Barber, the last 2 years, been won by a certain Mr. Joseph Newgarden.
Will Power should have won last year.
But
man, he had some crazy pace in that car. If not for that I think it was a left rear contact with Dixon or what have you, I think, and his left rear or right rear went down. I can't remember how, but man, this is one of those times because the Universal Aero Kit, I'm really intrigued more than maybe any other track on the circuit to see how it caters to Barber, because Barber has been such a hang on, hold on, and just turn it. And we know that Barber's more fit. It was built to be a motorcycle track. And the fact that it can host Indy cars and you see some really cool shows and dynamic strategy involved, it is a lot of fun. And I'm really curious to see how this Universal Aero Kit races at a place like that, a natural terrain road course, something we haven't seen yet this year. And I think it's going to be very interesting because that'll kind of set the tone for what we might see at Mid-Ohio and places like that.
Absolutely, yes. You've got Newgarden has won there a couple of times. Ryan Hunter-Reay has won there a couple of times. And Rossi is right up there when you look at who's going to be good at Barber. So, I mean, Joey, who do you like for Barber?
Oh, man,
I know this was tough to call. I was trying to do my picks in the pool. I'm thinking, Graham Rahal will be pretty good. Ryan Hunter-Reay, Rossi, and Will Power, Newgarden. The names just keep Pagenaud. The names just keep coming at you. Like, man, there's a lot of guys who are going to be really good there, but only one of them can win.
Well, according to Marco Andretti's tweet after Long Beach, if he can get his head out of his ass and qualify in the top 10, he's going to win a race. So if that happens, I'd say, if he qualifies in the top 10, look out for him. But otherwise, I think it's going to be somebody from Honda. I just don't know who, honestly. I think you're looking at somebody like Dixon, maybe Hunter-Reay finally getting that drought off his back. That's probably who I would look for.
Maybe even a guy like Robert Wickens, who was kind of low key at Long Beach, but he wasn't terrible, but he wasn't as really good as he was in the first two races. But the type of racing he's been doing, that should fit his style pretty well. Perhaps not.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's such a judgment call. It's It's really, out of every race this season, Barber to me is probably the biggest unknown. I mean, because everything else, there's a heavy importance on qualifying and minimizing mistakes. I mean, just as soon as we say somebody like Wickens, I would actually be hard-pressed to say, what about his teammate? Because, his teammate's not too shabby at places like this either. But, I mean, yeah, I'm gonna kick with the Dixon idea because of the whole Mid-Ohio and what he's been able to do. I think Powers, a Penske guy could easily get up there. I mean, Pagenaud definitely is somebody that when you look at Barber, he needs a really good finish because, I mean, he's right ahead of Charlie Kimball, I think, which is back in like 18th or 17th in points, 1 point ahead of Kimball, who just got Carlin's first top 10, 3 races into the Verizon IndyCar Series career. Carlin's got a top 10 with Kimball after Long Beach, so that was pretty cool. But
that is pretty cool,
Pagenaud definitely needs one after the first opening lap. Couldn't even get to the first corner DNF at Long Beach. He needs a good rebound. It'd be a good springboard for him going to the Indy GP too, because we all know that Pagenaud's somebody to beat at the GP.
All right, so Seth, you get a pick for Barber.
Ray Hall.
All right, Gray.
Gosh, Newgarden.
Good pick. Richard, who do you like?
Pagenaud.
Okay. I'm going to go with Will Power then, since y'all left him for me. So with that being said, IndyCar is going to be at Alabama next weekend. Joey, you'll be there. I look forward to talking to you next week about all your experiences at Alabama. That is one of the neatest tracks on the schedule. But let's talk about Formula One. Formula One was in Shanghai. Richard, you're our resident Formula One expert. Daniel Ricciardo won the race. Desperately needed a win for Red Bull after Ferrari has taken the first 2 wins and 3 races in, and Mercedes is still winless. So, kind of take us through this because it wasn't. There was a little bit of luck, a little bit of safety car, a little bit of things that fell right into Daniel's lap there. So, Richard, I'll let you take us through it.
Well, first off, one of the things we saw, probably for the first time in, goodness me, the hybrid era, so four and a bit years, Mercedes really weren't at the races. In qualifying, they both Bottas and Hamilton were soundly beaten by the 2 Ferraris. I think half a second was the gap there, which was pretty unheard of, especially after some of the comments coming out of Ferrari about Mercedes' special qualifying modes and all this other stuff. And then, of course, as soon as the Ferraris are quick at China, Hamilton makes some comments about how it's unusual that the Ferrari is quick everywhere, and it's just silly tit-for-tat comments in the media. I don't think there's anything really going on there. It's just they like the sound of their own voices. So they go into the race, and you've got a scenario where you're looking for the Ferraris to dominate the race. Bottas gets a good start, gets ahead of Raikkonen, who drops back, and sort of Bottas can hold himself to, Bottas could sort of maintain a gap to Vettel. I don't think he could ever really push him. And we saw a scenario where it was pretty much going to plan for Vettel, really, and then there was the pit stop strategy change that got Bottas ahead of Vettel on the first round of pit stops, which was a little bit, unexpected there, and almost sort of, looking back at what we've seen in previous races where, Mercedes have been caught out by Ferrari. Ferrari are now caught out by Mercedes in this instance. And then you had the 2 Toro Rossos after, really strong showing in Bahrain were nowhere. And they managed to trip over themselves and leave debris all over the hairpin towards the end of the lap there. And it was a bit amateurish by both of those guys, really. And not really what, especially in the Red Bull Junior team, not really something you want to do to sort of capture the imagination of the Red Bull bosses. And that brings out the safety car. Now, timing of the safety car was critical here, and the scenario was that both Bottas and Vettel were past the safety car, or I believe they were past the pit entry when the safety car was called out. So they didn't have an opportunity to pit. Mercedes decided not to pit Hamilton because they thought that there wasn't the advantage of going onto the soft tyres, losing track position, and they anticipated that it would be harder to pass than it actually turned out to be. So for the second time in the race, you saw Red Bull pull off I'm not going to say a masterstroke, but a well-executed pit stop routine where both Verstappen and Ricciardo sort of pitted back-to-back. And they were on the quicker tyre, far quicker tyre, and they moved through the field incredibly aggressively. When Verstappen came up against Hamilton, he ended up being, I wouldn't say Hamilton pushed him wide, but he certainly ran out of road, and Hamilton used the limits of the track, which put Verstappen behind Ricciardo. And then Ricciardo with some fantastic clean passing, some great moves there towards the end of the race. And then you had, to sort of cap it all off, Max sort of making a bit of a clumsy move on Sebastian Vettel there and pushing them both out of contention. Verstappen got a penalty for that move, and Vettel got damage, which dropped him, I believe it was to 7th by the end of the race. So not the race that they'd expected. And I think it's probably fair to say that in all 3 races this season, the fastest car hasn't won, which is great for the sport and sets up the championship really, really nicely. But it makes it predicting, and it makes us sound very stupid when we try and predict who's going to win these races. But it's been fantastic. And as a side note, this is the first time in the hybrid era that Mercedes have gone 3 races without winning. So it's these teams are starting to get closer and closer, and you're starting to see a little bit of a shift. And hopefully, going to Azerbaijan again, we'll see another exciting race.
Now, Joey, you've got some comments about Ferrari's strategy.
Yeah, I didn't quite understand why. Essentially, they hung Kimi out pretty bad. You're looking at the start, and Vettel's already got his wheels turned 5 degrees to the right. So whenever he comes off the line, him and Kimi both got decent starts, but Kimi got a slightly better one to pull even with Vettel. And Vettel, if Kimi didn't let out with the bad angle going into 1, they were going to wreck. So he had to back out. That brought Bottas past. That brought Verstappen past. And then, Kimi's sitting right there in P4 trying to fend off Hamilton for a little bit. And, they kept Kimi out there until, what was it, like lap 29, I think, Richard? Something like that?
It was well into the race. It was quite deep into the race, yeah.
Yeah, it was... They were like, oh, we're going to see if... Essentially, it was like, okay, well, we're going to use Kimi now as the guy to back up Bottas with Vettel. And it backfired. This was probably the worst strategical race that I've maybe seen Ferrari do in quite a long time. They were trying to find ways to not win. What they did on Sunday was reminiscent of how Mercedes took themselves out of races and Ferrari pounced. It's very unique. And you know what? If I'm Mercedes... You look at how Ricciardo's running. You see that right now Bottas has been taking Hamilton to the woodshed recently. I think you've got to have some heavy consideration. I don't care if he is a 4-time champ. I think there's got to be some consideration there. So you know what? Danny Rick keeps winning these races, and he's not doing it from the front row. He's doing it from P4, P5, P6, and he's always digging. The story with Ricciardo to me was so fascinating because I'm sitting there at the Airbnb out in Long Beach, and I'm watching qualifying, and Daniel Ricciardo had the engine issue in FP3, barely got out for Q1, made 1 lap in Q1 to advance to Q2, finally got everything settled to get into Q3. Borderline was ready to start at the back of the field or from pit lane. So to go from barely being able to make qualifying after some part swap there to being a guy that starts P6 and goes on to win this race. Incredible drive. Is without question a drive that should land him, if not a permanent situation as lead driver at Red Bull. You would think that somebody like Ferrari or Mercedes are definitely going to come calling after him continuing to put those kind of performances in.
But you make that point. But if Verstappen hadn't, Verstappen was ahead on track at the point where they made the strategy call, and if Verstappen hadn't been quite so hot-headed in trying to force his way past Hamilton and had a little bit more... Oh, yeah, no, for sure. I do understand that. But, that will come from, Verstappen's standpoint, eventually. Verstappen's, 21 now? I mean, he's certainly got time on his side. And I'm not saying that Ricciardo's an elder statesman by any stretch of the imagination. But if you're Red Bull, where does your future lie?
I agree.
And if you're going to have a 1 and a 2, then you probably are going to look at Verstappen a little bit more. Rightly or wrongly, at the moment, obviously they're looking at long-term sustainability with these guys, and it'll be fascinating to see which way they go and how they try to sort of play this out and keep everybody happy.
I know they feel like maybe in Verstappen they have the next Sebastian Vettel, somebody that could be there for 6, 7, 8 years and win them a handful of championships. And yeah, if he can learn from his mistakes, he can. But you've got one kid that's trying to drive like Ayrton Senna, and he doesn't have anywhere near the ability to judge when he makes correct passes. He couldn't just wait 2 or 3 corners. And then you got a guy like Ricciardo who more calculated while still being aggressive. And you could argue he's driving like a lane Prost, which is kind of funny to have the similarities there. I just look at it like, Ricciardo I think is like 26, 27, 28, something like that. So, there's a decent age gap there. But we all know that money talks in Formula One, and you're with Verstappen, actually with any driver, I can't think, especially after Vettel, that any one driver is going to stay at one team for 10 or 15 years. And we're looking at Verstappen, who, he just signed a big deal. I'd argue that that's probably his last deal that he's going to sign with Red Bull, and that you're going to see him get offers at Mercedes, or if Renault starts to look really, really good. I mean, the one thing that Red Bull have in their back pocket is Carlos Sainz, because no matter what happens this year, they have the ability to get him back and put him in that seat right next to Verstappen. And I would argue that Carlos Sainz is a more well-rounded driver and is a guy that can match Verstappen talent for talent while still making better passes and better judgments. So I don't know. Like, it doesn't make any difference to me how talented you are if you're not getting the job done. And right now, Verstappen just isn't. I mean, he's, like Vettel said, you've got 100 Grand Prix under your belt. I can't call you, young and in development at this point.
All right, so where are we off next to in Formula One?
Azerbaijan.
And is that this coming week, or we have a week off?
It's a week off.
Week off? Okay, then Azerbaijan, which is a very tight little fake Monaco. So
it'll be interesting. I mean, the first year they went there, I think everybody was a little bit overly cautious about all these tight corners and driving around the castle there. But then last year, everybody's like, "Oh yeah, it's easy around here," and it got a little bit hairy.
Hey, I got a question actually for you, Richard, on this one. With Baku, every time we see F1 go there, the temperatures are hot, and tires are always kind of a weird issue. And usually, Force India is a team that takes advantage and gets podiums out there, runs strong. I don't necessarily predict that for them this next race, but because we're going there at a different time of the year, is it still just as hot where we're running into the same weather issues that we had back in the day?
That's a very good question. I don't know, unfortunately, what the forecast is for this weekend, but I think it's going to be a pretty hot climate there anyway. And to a certain extent, the heat issue isn't so much the ambient temperature. It's how these tires have a very, very well-defined operating window. They've got you only have a few. It's how you maintain that window, how you can keep the tyres in the correct operating zone, which is the challenge. And some teams get it, and that's where you often hear of these teams complaining of overheating, the tyres not getting enough heat into the tyres, whichever way it may be. So I think no matter what the temperature is, it's how the teams can build their tyre, and work the tyre into that temperature range that's more of the issue rather than the ambient temperature. Some teams who naturally overheat their tyres will probably struggle on hotter tracks. some teams that struggle to get heat into their tyres will probably struggle on colder tracks. So it's more about how they get into their window than the actual ambient temperature, I think.
All right, so let's look down the grid a bit. McLaren actually had a pretty decent weekend. Alonso was not half bad today, or this past weekend. So, and Hulkenberg was there as well. So, let's talk about McLaren and with the Renault engine. Are we going to see Alonso get back to the front, or is this still the continuation of a failed experiment, Richard?
I mean, I think, again, we've talked about this on the show. You look at Alonso's history of sort of jumping ship or making bad career moves. And I was actually talking about this with a former colleague earlier. There's a certain sense that, how should we put it? McLaren have been more concerned with keeping Alonso than they are with the best the best future for the team in terms of engine deal. You can argue, and to a certain extent, you'd be right to argue that Honda is the way to go long term. I'm not saying that they're good at the moment or they're capable at the moment of beating any of the likes of Renault and Ferrari and Mercedes. But if they're going to stick at it, they'll stick to it and they'll do a good job at it. The money that McLaren are giving up by ditching Honda, again, is that worth it? I question that. I genuinely do. I think that, and this is and Alonso, to my mind, is one of the, if not the most talented driver in the grid. My question is he worth it? Have they been sort of not blackmailed, but their hand forced by Alonso, and is that fair? Should they have said, well, sorry, Fernando, our future is with Honda. They're bringing 100, 150, $200 million into the team every year. We believe we will be successful. Should they have gone down that route and, to a certain extent, told Alonso to, like it or go play somewhere else? I don't know. But I think the fact that Red Bull have won a race with the same engine, Renault are competitive with the same engine, McLaren, they've been competitive, but, there's nowhere for them to hide now. And this is exposing them. I'm not saying they're bad, but are they as good as they've been saying for the last 3 or 4 years with that Honda engine? I'm not sure.
I don't know. I'm not used to McLaren kowtowing, to drivers. We never saw that when Ron Dennis was in charge. But
no.
Ron Dennis is no longer there, so, I mean, it's
exactly.
Is what it is,
But why, Yeah, I mean, my sort of, what's the word? My sort of belief, if you like, is that you will never win a world championship in Formula One as a customer engine. And Renault, going forward, will be a customer engine. You've got the Renault works team back there. You're pretty certain that in the long run, Red Bull will leave Renault in one form or another and end up going to potentially Honda, especially if Honda start to improve their performances with the Toro Rosso group. And, you just think that backs them into a corner a little bit. Again, personally, I would have stuck with Honda and played it out. You've made your bed, you've got to lay in it to a certain extent.
So you're saying that the constructor era in Formula One is essentially over. And for teams like Williams, McLaren, and even Red Bull, who are constructors who purchase a customer engine, will never be ahead of the Ferraris or Mercedes or factory teams.
I struggle to see, with the money involved these days, how that is a going proposition for these companies which are an engine manufacturer and a team in the future.
And that's absolutely sad, because Formula One was built on constructors,
Oh no, without any hesitation, and I totally agree. But you look at the politics of it, and you look at the financial situation of it, and if you put your, for want of a better word, your team owner hat on, or if you're the boss of Renault and you have your own team, which is your constructor, chassis, and engine, and then you're selling that engine to a team that's beating you, okay, yes, there is a certain amount of pride there that you've made an engine which is capable of championship. But we all know that it's Red Bull that are on the Constructors' Championship trophy, not Renault. I mean, and it's Mercedes on there. It's, you know, if Williams won a championship, it'd be Williams, not Williams Honda and Williams Renault. That's how everybody thinks. And, you know, when McLaren won the championships, you don't think of, you do to a certain extent, but you don't instantly think, well, it was McLaren Honda and McLaren Mercedes that won those championships. So I think that
McLaren Tag Porsche,
yes.
yeah. But what's the possibility that Honda enters a straight factory team?
I don't think they will. They've done that and they got burnt. They don't understand.
Sure, yeah.
Well, you see, you argue that. You sort of mentioned that. But what you have to remember is that the Braun car, which won in 2009, I think it was, that was basically a Honda car. It was funded by Honda. Even though Honda had officially pulled out, they paid for that car because it was cheaper for them to pay for that team for a year than it was to fold the team. So that car that you saw there was a Honda car. Now, talking to people that, you know, were at the team at the time and had some knowledge of it, the fact that they went to the Mercedes engine actually found them about a second to three-quarters of a second to a second a lap over the Honda engine. So in a way, it was the fact that it was a Mercedes engine in the back of that car which helped them win the championship. So I can't. I think Honda now are in a position where, like, okay, let's just stick to the engine. Let's get that bit right. Let's get that bit working. And I wouldn't be surprised if to say you don't see a Red Bull Honda next year.
Wouldn't surprise me in a bit. So anyway, with that being said, we need to move on now. Joey, you've got to get on the road. So I want to thank you for coming on. Before you make an exit and start packing your baggage to go to Alabama, do you have any final thoughts you want to add to the show before we start talking about Bristol?
I guess my final thought is just to touch on something like what y'all were just talking about with Honda, and that's just, I could see a scenario playing out where at some point Honda buy out an established Formula One team, but they would have to be established, and they would have to have been running the Honda engine program for quite a while. So,
but you see, they tried that with BAR, and it really. Yeah. And I know they're not established, but it just didn't really work, did it? You know, it was a bit of a anticlimax, for want of a better word. And as I say, I think they learn. I mean, they had some really good guys in there, you know, at BAR, like guys like Jeff Willis and guys like that who were very, very, very well regarded in the sport, and they tried to bring in their own sort of Japanese guys, and you know, it just didn't work. And I think hopefully they took a huge hit on that. So hopefully they've learned their lessons a little bit and are going to let the experts stick to it, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, so from that end, also to kind of go with that final thought is, I don't think you're ever going to see a situation anytime soon unless the rules completely change. It would be embarrassing for teams like Mercedes if Williams was kicking their ass.
Exactly,
and,
yeah.
So
to a certain extent, they don't allow it.
Yeah, so if they're in a head-to-head battle for the championship, you really think some of those MG UK parts and other things that are going to be going their way, you don't think they might have a little bit of wear and life on them? Because I bet you, when
I was at Williams, there was when Williams started to push Mercedes, there was rumours that Mercedes insisted on a more aggressive cooling package for the Williams cars. Now, it probably didn't need it, but that was Mercedes' way of sort of covering themselves and forcing Williams to virtually slow their car down. So I don't know. I mean, that was all rumour and hearsay. I don't want to make any accusations of anybody, but exactly. It's like, oh yeah, look, this is the Friday afternoon part, you've ended up getting.
Where's NASCAR this weekend anyway? Speaking of my final thought,
Richmond.
I'll go Boyer.
Okay, so with that being said, Joey, I wish you safe travels to Alabama, and we'll talk about this Bristol race. And Gray, my good friend, you I've been in NASCAR as long as anybody in the world, and Seth, you were at the race. So, Gray, let's talk about this Bristol race. We plagued by some weather. The poor stands were empty both days. And I think the stands were empty the first day due to the fact that the weather forecast was horrible. The stands were empty the second day due to the fact that it was Monday and people had to work. But put on a pretty good race, huh?
It did, if I may, real quick, as far as the stands being empty the first day. A lot of people didn't actually expect NASCAR to even start the race. Just for example, there were a few fans I spoke to. They were still sitting in their trucks when they heard the jet dryers light up, and they went running in and got there just as the green flag started. And there were a handful of teams that weren't even set up by the time the green flag waved.
Yeah, and to be honest, I had resigned to the fact that the race was not going to go off, and I happened to be flipping the channels and come upon the race channel, and we're 15 laps in, and I'm thinking, well, maybe they're running, showing last year's race, and then I start looking at the car numbers and recognize, no, this is live. So yeah, it went off, and all the forecasts were terrible. They were given a 15% chance of starting the race, and that really kept a lot of people away, and I'm sure it kept a lot of the walk-up. No, it kept a lot of the walk-up crowd, and probably kept a lot of the people away that even held tickets for it. So it's, not really it's bad in that regard, but there again, NASCAR would run the race if there was one person in the stands or not, because, it's all driven by television now. But it was 2 great days of racing. Those guys actually put on a really good show for 2 days. The weather was wacky and it was cold, but we saw some really good racing at Bristol, and it's a shame that they didn't have better weather and be able to do it in front of an on-hand crowd.
All right, so Kyle Busch took the win.
Yes.
There's a little bumping and running there near the end there. Who were some of the other dominant cars of the day? I'm trying to remember
Kyle Larson,
because I watched it. Yes, Kyle Larson. I watched it.
Ryan Blaney. Ryan Blaney led out of the first 117 laps. He led 99 and got swept up in that multi-car accident just before the end of stage 2. Chris Buescher and Trevor Bayne got together, spinning the two, both themselves and Jamie McMurray and Harrison Rhodes going into turn 3, and Blaney had absolutely nowhere to go.
Yeah, he was racing side by side with the 2 car as they approached the wreck, and Blaney could go nowhere, and it's a shame because he had a really good car. Larson was great, and Larson, he got. I tell you, the good thing about it was, the cars ran. They were able to pass this time and run multiple grooves. Really worked well. Larson, he got taken out by Ryan Newman there late in the race and was able to recover and come back and race for the win. So when I thought his day was going to be done, Ricky Stenhouse had a good day. The 2 car, Keselowski, he had a good day, but faded there at the end. Bubba Wallace had a really good day in the 43 car. He showed some strength there in that car, and until he faded at the end. So it was a lot of players there that ran particularly well. Some of the cars that we normally think were taken out early. The 78 was caught up on that lap 3 wreck.
As was Chase Elliott.
Chase Elliott caught up.
And somebody else who was caught up in that was Michael McDowell, who had an excellent qualifying run, qualified 9th, and he was fastest in the final practice. His team was one of the teams that was not set up when the green flag fell, so he ended up not making the crash clock because the team wasn't set up properly and prepared for him to come down pit road on lap 3.
Yeah, and that's unfortunate. There again, NASCAR just trying to beat the clock, and I think maybe NASCAR learned a little bit of lesson, but there again, so much of what is done is dictated by TV. They did announce on Saturday that they were going to move the start time up by 1 hour, and they achieved that and got lucky and got a break and were able to do it. But I tell you, anytime you've got, when they knew, I mean, it was obvious that the weather forecast was not going to allow them to run a complete race on Sunday, much less even get to the halfway point.
Well, they got close. They got 204 laps in. Granted, there were a couple stoppages. One of them was for that multi-car wreck, which, if they didn't have to red flag it for that wreck,
they may have made it.
They would have made it.
But there again, then they don't have a full race at all. They stop after segment 2, and they've only run half the race. As it was, they would have been able to get in the complete race on Monday had they started it a little bit earlier than 1 o'clock. So anyway, I mean it was one of those damned if you do, damned if you don't kind of situations for NASCAR, and it's nothing they can do about the weather. Weather's gonna come in, and so far weather has been a major story this year already.
They wouldn't have gotten the entire race in on Monday, even if they had started an hour earlier before 1. They would have had to start around 11, and it was freezing rain at 11 a.m. But immediately after the race, I'm standing there on pit road trying to get a word with Ricky Stenhouse Jr., and it started snowing.
Yeah, I saw the snow in Victory Lane. Yeah, but yeah, it's just it's tough, and I hated it for the fans who lost money and didn't get to use the tickets they bought. Just a bad deal all the way around. But that's the chance you take sometimes with this stuff. But all in all, if there is a silver lining in this story for Bristol, it was that the racing was really good. It was a good race, and the cars and the stars put on a great show.
Now, something I do want to mention, going back to Bubba Wallace, he worked his way up to the lead. He led 6 laps, the first 6 laps he's ever led in his Cup Series career, and he moved Brad Keselowski out of the way for it. He earned that lead. He did not get it via pit strategy or anything like that.
He drove to the front.
And granted, it's the first time we're going to say this, and probably one of the only times we'll have to say this, but it was the first laps led by an African-American in the premier series of NASCAR since Wendell Scott won in 1963.
And that was at Jacksonville, yes.
That was
55 years
yep.
ago.
Mm-hmm.
And it's also the first time in the modern era that an African-American has led in NASCAR.
And like I said, he earned it. He deserved it. He drove the car to the front, and he ran a good race. I know he was disappointed because he faded there at the end, but hey, it was a shot in the arm for that team, and it's going to give him some confidence, particularly going into this weekend's race at Richmond.
Now, I'm just going to say this one thing. The reason why Keselowski, and a few others faded at the end, there was that brief rain shower right after Bubba Wallace got the lead, and both Keselowski, Bubba Wallace, Casey Kane, and a handful of others, they were set up for a track that was going to get looser. It never got looser because the rain and the water washed the rubber back off the track.
Yeah, a lot of guys, had different strategies on tires there at the end. Some guys were able to come and some guys stayed out on tires because they didn't want to give up track position. Other guys came to pit road and got 4. So it was a little bit different. Everybody played a little bit different strategy there late in the race, too, that kind of helped some guys and bit some others.
Now, while I was there, I asked a few crew members about the pit guns, because that's been one of the big stories that's been going on this year. Apparently, there's some stuff with the pit guns that the manufacturer promised prior to the start of the year that they haven't followed through with. One was diagnostics, which would tell the tire changer, and again, I'm hearing this from the pit crews, whether or not this is accurate, I don't entirely know, that would tell the tire changer whether or not he actually got each lug nut tight. And there was also supposed to be telemetry that would tell them about the performance of the gun, whether or not it was working correctly. Again, neither of those have been followed through, but going on with the pit guns, there was also been talk that all the teams voted for this. All the teams wanted this. All the teams asked for this. NASCAR actually had the teams vote on this.
Yes.
And
Yes.
Yeah.
and there were several teams that voted against this, including Gibbs, including Stuart Haas.
Yep.
And then there were teams that voted for this. And my understanding is that there may or may not have been a tie that NASCAR broke. Anyway.
That's interesting. That really, yeah. But NASCAR would have the upper hand in that. We got a tie. This is what we're going to do. Yeah.
Anyway, I do also want to mention some stuff that happened in the Xfinity Series real quick. Because we also had an Xfinity Series race. It was the first Dash for Cash race, so there were no Cup drivers whatsoever in the field. Ryan Preece, who was eligible for the Dash for Cash at Bristol, won the race. However, he is not eligible at Richmond because he is not entered at Richmond. He is driving part-time for Joe Gibbs Racing. The 4 drivers for the Dash for Cash at Richmond are Justin Allgaier and Elliott Sadler, Spencer Gallagher, and Daniel Hemrick. Now, post-race, NASCAR had said that Hemrick had failed tech because his toe was out of alignment, mechanical measurements, and that Brandon Jones would be in the Dash for Cash. Sunday morning, NASCAR admitted that they made a mistake. Series Managing Director Wayne Otten spoke to us in the media center. According to the Xfinity Series rules, in order for a car to fail tech and reach the penalty of an L1 penalty, the car would have to be out of alignment on both the left and the right. Hemrick's car was only out of alignment on the right rear. Therefore, it does not amount to an L1 penalty, and he is still in the Dash for Cash. So, essentially, he failed, but he didn't fail tech.
I guess it depends on what side of the story you believe, but one guy's in a dash, one guy ain't. So,
and the last thing I do want to say about the Xfinity Series race, about halfway through the race, there was an accident between Cody Ware and Vinnie Miller, and checking up for it, Christopher Bell slammed on the brakes, and he had been having issues with his brakes prior. They locked up, and he whipped into the wreck. The force of the impact was so great, it buckled the roof.
Ooh.
And,
ouch, yeah.
And they parked the car right outside the media center. I went out and took pictures of it. But crew members and NASCAR officials were not letting anybody take pictures of the right side where the impact was. Now, whether or not NASCAR took the car, or if NASCAR was just helping them get the cover on it, I'm not sure. But to me, with how much the roof buckled, I think NASCAR may have wanted to take a look at the car.
Well, you've got the new composite body, and I'm sure that there's still a work in progress, and they're looking at some of those things. And I imagine that the car did make its way back to the tech center for more evaluation.
All right, so guys, we are off to Richmond next week. We've just got about 2 minutes left in the show, so let's. Joey's already picked Clint Boyer. So Richard, who do you like?
Truex.
And Gray?
Oh boy, let's see. I'm gonna go with I'm going to go with the 42 because he won there in the fall, and he's left Bristol pretty disappointed this weekend. So I think see if he can rebound and show some strength there, and then that would be a good win for Chevrolet if they can get it.
Good win for Chevrolet, Chip Ganassi, and Kyle Larson. Yeah. So Seth, who do you like?
I'm going to go with Kyle Busch, who is now 15th on the list for all-time wins.
Okay, and I'm going to go for Darrell Wallace because that guy has just been chomping at the bit for a race win, and he's really good on the short tracks. Maybe I'm foolish for picking him, but hey, you know what? That little team, and it's sad to say that Richard Petty Motorsports is a little team in the sport. But I think Darrell Wallace has what it takes to be a NASCAR guy, and I think he's going to kind of push his way to the front there at Bristol, or at Richmond rather. So, with that being said, we're just about out of time. We'll be back on in a week. I want to thank you, Gray Warren. I want to thank you, Richard Youden, Seth Eggert. I want to thank Joey Barnes, who left a little earlier. I want to thank the Whoobazoo Radio Network and iHeartRadio for hosting our show. And guys, we'll talk to you in 1 week. Good night.
WHOOBAZOO, that's Whoobazoo.com.
Enter website, enter website, enter website, enter website.